is Tell Me What to Read, the podcast of booktopia.com.au. I'm Nick Wasiliev, and I'm thrilled to bring you a special episode this week. For the next 2 weeks, we'll be releasing a duology of podcasts where Ben Hunter, our fiction guru, chats with debut authors. This is A Date with a Debut. First up in this series, Ben sits down with Dinuka McKenzie, author of fiction thriller set in northern New South Wales, The Torrent. Then Ben sits down with Maryrose Cuskelly, author of the atmospheric and unputdownable crime thriller, The Cane. Check the show notes below for timestamps for both interviews, as well as links to the books mentioned. Now over to Ben's interview with Dinuka McKenzie.
Hi, I'm Ben Hunter, Booktopia's fiction category manager, and today, speaking to me through the wonders of the Zoom portal, is Dinuka McKenzie. She's an Australian writer and the winner of the 2020 Banjo Prize. Her debut novel is called The Torrent, and I love it. I think it is the perfect piece of crime fiction for fans of Jane Harper or Sarah Bailey. Dinuka McKenzie, thanks for being on the pod.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's exciting times. How long have you been writing? What interested you to get started, and what do you look for in a good book?
Ooh, a few questions there. So in terms of writing, I guess, look, I'm one of these people who had absolutely nil ambitions for writing. The writing in this book is a complete accident as a result of, I guess, me being in the absolute throes of looking after little people and finding that I just needed to carve out a space for myself where I wasn't something that was entirely for me, that wasn't me being a mother or a wife or an employee or a, whatever, and so that's kind of really when I had my second bub, I decided to kind of start writing. And I think that came out of sort of a great love of reading, even though I've never sort of, written sort of creatively ever before this. I've always read. Like, that has absolutely been a complete constant in my life from, day whatever, since whenever I could read. So I think, in terms of trying something new, that seemed the obvious point to start at. So that's kind of how I started writing. So I think I put the first draft of this down maybe in 2017, I think. Yeah, 2016/17, something like that. So, yeah. So, and I think in terms of what I like reading, very much comfort read is crime fiction. I mean, I read widely, but, I would say without a doubt crime fiction and in particularly detective fiction, which, is then obviously reflected in this book. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's gorgeous detective fiction. Do you have a favourite author in the realm of detective fiction?
Look, I think, in my 20s, I read a lot of Ruth Rendell. And what I really liked about her writing is it's not like, it's obviously a police procedural, like with her Wexford series, but it's not focused on the nitty gritty of the investigation. So, like the evidence trail and the blood splatter and the whatever. It's more on that psychological, why people end up, how they find themselves in that position and why people do certain things. And I just enjoyed that so much, just kind of traveling through sort of the story with the detective to guide you, but it's more about the people, and you go through that story in the familiar form of a police procedural, but it's very much all about people. And I think that's the kind of detective fiction that I really like. So, Sarah Bailey does that really well as well. I love her Gemma Woodstock series. And now with The Housemate, another sort of brilliant, sort of obviously not sort of police procedural, but still newspaper procedural. I don't know, whatever that's called, journalist procedural. I don't know, whatever that's called. But yeah, so there's a number of those kind of, authors around.
So what can readers then expect from The Torrent, your debut?
Yeah, look, I think with The Torrent, what you are going to get is hopefully a character that you can, very much relate to. So I think hopefully the main character in the book, Kate Miles, she's sort of heavily pregnant when we meet her. She is in her last week of work before she goes on maternity leave, and she is very much in the throes of trying to manage, a very successful sort of career which she has built up and worked really hard on. But obviously her life has now changed with having a young son, and also now being heavily pregnant. But she is managing that, and probably even to herself, she probably doesn't admit that now she has some restrictions to her life, but she's trying to manage that. So what I wanted to create was very much a character and a woman that I guess you would instantly recognize. This is a version of the women I see all in my life, who are my contemporaries, who are, highly professionally competent, but are always juggling a million things. And hopefully the readers will see the women in their lives, or they'll see themselves, and want to take that journey of a police procedural with a different type of protagonist, not the entrenched trope, of the sort of the male single, childless detective, so yeah.
Yeah, Kate Miles. She's a world away from Harry Bosch, and I love her. It's also a stupendously atmospheric read, and it's set deep in the kind of north of the state, that kind of northern rivers, very humid, lots of where the farms meet the sea kind of area, and obviously. The title, the Torrent, a flood catalyzes this mystery story that we follow, a drowned man and how that came to be. But it's you could have a flood almost anywhere in this country. All of Australia floods. So what I'm curious, what drew you to that place and all of its kind of disparities and quiet angsts?
Yeah, that's actually so true. And I think, so I guess, stepping back a bit, I guess that first seed of the idea being a flood was very much, I think, from, those huge floods that happened in sort of 2010, 11 in southeast Queensland, northern New South Wales, where sort of that Brisbane River flooded, and there's images on the news where that, that full kind of that massive river flood, that really stayed with me. And then like a number of years later, when I was kind of starting to play around with ideas, that sort of popped into my head, and I went, wouldn't sort of like a crime involving a natural disaster and maybe a flood, and that I started playing around with that idea. And I think then when I was thinking of a setting, it just automatically went to that area, sort of that border region. And I was very deliberate that I wanted to locate it in New South Wales, because obviously, I was taking on detective fiction, and I knew I just didn't want the added complexity of sort of locating it in Queensland, which I hadn't lived, and then there'd be a new set of legislation, things, even more complications. So I wanted it south of the border. And then I had visited that area sort of over in various years for various kind of work projects. And one of the work projects that I visited was in the Murwillumbah Condong area. So that and so then when I was starting to think of it setting, I was like, hang on, the Tweed River floods, and I've been there, and so that's how it came about. And but I was very obviously specific of making it into a fictional town. It's absolutely not located in a specific town in that area, because, obviously I haven't lived in that area for any length of time. So in that sense, I wanted the flexibility of a fictional town, so it's a fictional version of that area, but just taking those kind of iconic things that make people go, I know that area, and sort of go into,
It's instantly recognizable.
Yeah,
it really is. And you feel the heat of the place, and the kind of any kind of anywhere near the coast is there's a big gap between haves and have-nots, and you just quietly kind of weave that through your story as well. There's so much going on just in the region, but yeah, your character Kate Miles, I feel like I want to ask, how long had you been evolving her interior world before you kind of put pen to paper on this novel? Because there's a lot going on with her.
Yeah.
I feel like there's stories to come from Kate Miles.
Yeah, look, I think so. I think there's definitely stories to come with Kate. But look, I was just, as I said, I didn't think about it too much when I started writing. And I think the issues that she's trying to grapple with are very much the issues that I was trying to grapple with at the very same period of my life where, I was kind of in the midst of that kind of navigating, young children and home life versus sort of the obligations to your career and your ambitions for your career. So trying to navigate that. And I just thought, what would that look like for a police officer? You take, this, which I find quite hard and often don't get the balance right. How would that look like for a police officer, particularly from her point of view where, she is still a woman in a fairly male-dominated profession. And so she always, she has that automatic thing of having to prove herself and making sure that, people aren't sort of, she isn't open to criticism, that she's getting special treatment and that she's, like she needs special rules and she's weaker and all of that. So she would have absorbed, in my mind, she would have absorbed all those narratives and internalized them. And so she's very much kind of not acting out, but she very much has a chip on her shoulder about all those things. And she's very determined to not, have any opening for criticism on those points of view. And so for her, she's a person of colour. She's in a senior role in the police in the police force. So all of that combines to go, for her, she needs to show no weakness. Whether rightly or wrongly, that's the stuff that she's internalized. So,
yeah, and in every interaction she has, both with the public-facing aspects of her job, dealing with local councillors who've had their daughter accosted at the local Macca's, or just within the force, dealing with subordinates, the white men who have lower ranks than her, even though they're older and had been in it for longer. Everywhere she turns, there's a microaggression, and sometimes there's a macroaggression. Really, it keeps the reader on the toes as well. It's part of the intensity of this book. I feel it's integral to it.
Yeah, look, and I think I wanted sort of some of those interactions because they're not, in particular, I think there is that kind of generational difference. As you say, there's a certain interaction with a older member of the police force, very close to retirement, who I guess there is that, sense of, you go through the years and you go up the promotion ranks type thing. And there is this new generation who are coming up who, are very much, studying for the role and sort of she's taken sort of, her detective courses and all the rest of it. And so, they feel like, these young people who've come out of nowhere, who are they? And they want to find, I guess, a reason for that, whether, what is the reason? Is it special treatment rather than looking at the sort of necessarily the merits of it? So it's kind of finding the excuse for, your situation being the way it is. And so Kate has to navigate all of that. But what I really wanted to place that in, also in the context of that extreme loyalty that happens in the police force and any kind of those kind of institutions, whether it's the military or, that there is a level of, loyalty and kind of, you still work for the team, and so even though all these things are happening, the reality of it is that she still kind of manages it within that context rather than necessarily calling it out in a huge way. And I think that is an actual real pressure. You know, I mean, that's, you know, whilst we'd all like to think that we are heroes in that way, I think when your job is on the line and when you're having to manage all these things, it actually, you end up managing a person or a situation and try and, you know, work around it. And I think in the police force, somewhere like that, which has, I think, loyalty and you know, the force is very big, you know, that there's a cultural thing aspect to that. And I think, again, I see her as someone who has absolutely internalized some of those things as well. So, yeah.
Every time I read a crime novel and get wonderfully outwitted by the story craft of it, the first thing I want to know is how other readers are reacting to the book, and does it get them in the same way? Am I a fool for having been thwarted by the author's craftiness? And yeah, this is a debut novel, as we've covered. So how do you get friends and family to read it? How do you finesse and polish to kind of work in that trickery and you know, get the balance right of pulling the wool over the eyes just a little bit and then revealing it in just some most satisfying moment? How do you manage that?
Wow. Okay. I'm not really sure, to be honest. It's the first time I've done it. So I haven't really broken it down, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I very much knew, even right at the start, that I wanted two stories, you know, that would completely, you know, on the face of it, separate, to sort of intermingle at some point. So I started off with that. So I knew that was going to happen. And I, you know, obviously no spoilers, but I had very much the image of Kate and those final moments for her. Like, that was, you know, I had that image in my head straight away before I started writing. So I knew that was the end point. But how do we get to that end point? Because that will be the most tense end point for her as a character in this particular context. So I knew that was the end point I wanted to work towards. And I kind of felt that even in that first draft, I kind of felt that it would make sense to kind of have one chapter basically on one story and one chapter on the other story, and kind of, you know, hopefully at some point my brain would work out how they came together. And in terms of feedback, obviously, I mean, you know, I would say very much the one thing that has absolutely shaped this novel is, you know, feedback. And I've been incredibly lucky with, you know, many established writers who have freely given their time to kind of read through the manuscript and, you know, given me sort of that mentorship. And, you know, particularly people like Emma Viskich, who runs the sort of the Twitter feedback thing twice a year. And I was lucky enough to get chosen by her for that. And she kind of reviewed the manuscript and gave me all sorts of things, feedback. And her feedback was what was the version that I then submitted to the Banjo. You know, like, I changed the entire first chapter. Like, I think the first 4 chapters got revised. I added a whole new character thread, blah, blah, blah. You know, all that came with her feedback. And yeah, so, you know, so I'm very incredibly lucky. I mean, not that she told me to do any of that. She just went, okay, well, this bit, you know, it's not as interesting, you know, the pace kind of drops here. And so she told me where it stopped becoming interesting, and that's the bits that you got to work at, you know, and make it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I mean, you're right. You did do that work yourself, but we're blessed as readers as well, that there's such a good community of authors, particularly crime authors in Australia, that do that. It's, you know, and this novel is part of the fruit of that. It's really special.
Absolutely.
And, you just mentioned the Banjo Prize, so it's an unpublished manuscript award for a commercial fiction. How does it feel to win a literary prize before you've even published a book?
So it was obviously, you know, in this one moment, all your dreams come true, but it's also absolutely terrifying. And that's, you know, that's how I felt, because for me, as I said, like I had no ambitions of writing. This is my first book. And the more I got into the writing community, I realized, people have been working on novels for ages and for years and have, multiple manuscripts in their drawer. And so I just absolutely assumed that this was the apprenticeship novel. This was not going to get picked up. I would just work on the second one and hopefully the second would get picked up, and then they might look at the first one and then da-da-da. So the Banjo Prize, really, for me, I had an Excel spreadsheet and I had, all the publishers and I went, okay, well, I'll send it to the Banjo because then, HarperCollins will look at it, and then once they reject it, I can send it to, X, and then once they, and so that's what the process was. It had no... there's no intention or sort of expectation that I would win. I was just mad. And so when she called to say I've been shortlisted, I was like, oh, cool, that's it. That's the phone call. That's the memory I get to store away, because now I've got it, because now I can put that in my little query letter going, oh, shortlisted, please look at this novel. So yeah, I never expected to get the second phone call a week later or 2 weeks later, whatever it was. Saying I'd won. So yeah, it's pretty wild. Yeah.
That's so good. I can still see the huge grin on your face. It's a pleasure to see. I'm very excited about this book. I'm excited for people to read it because I tore through it. I've also been picking up whispers that you've been contracted for more books, or are getting contracted for more books. Will we read more Detective Kate Miles in those books? Because I would like that to be a thing.
Yes. So HarperCollins, they're so lovely. They trusted me with 2 more books. So as I said, while I was querying sort of this manuscript, which became the Torrent, I was absolutely writing another one because, that's what everyone says. You got to write another one because otherwise it's just so stressful. So I managed to sort of finish that draft and submit it to HarperCollins, and and that is a second book of Kate Miles. So it is a series, and that's we pick up her story. And so I gave that to HarperCollins and they were happy with it. And we also pitched them an idea for a third book, and they were happy to sort of accept it as a kind of a 2-book thing. So very, very lucky. Yes, I'll be editing book 2 and in theory writing book 3 this year, which is a nice blank page on my computer.
That's you've gone from unpublished novice to career author.
I know, it's and this is the thing. It feels like I don't know. It feels kind of just undeserving, or I don't know. Anyway, it feels like something. It feels like someone else's life. So I'm incredibly grateful, and I think again, it's that having that publisher who absolutely gets what you're trying to do, and that's that amazing magic thing where you muddle through and your book meets that publisher that it needs to do, and they just get it, and they and they put all their support behind it, and you just go, well, how did I deserve this? But I've just lucked out. So yeah, that's incredible.
Match made in heaven.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we've now come to the less serious part of the podcast where
right.
I'm going to be talking to a number of debut authors, and it's Valentine's Day soon. So to make it spicy and exciting, I've devised some perfect match style dating questions for your debut novel.
Right.
So you ready for question 1?
Okay.
If you had to pair your novel sommelier style with a beverage, any beverage, could be a wild cocktail, could be just something straight out of the fridge at home, what would you choose?
Well, there is actually a line in the book about Kate's lovely husband Jeff being a bit of a wine snob. So I think, didn't he choose a God, I can't even remember now. I think, didn't he choose a South American Riesling or something?
Oh yeah, Argentinian. That's right.
So let's go with that. Whatever Jeff chose, whatever that South American wine was, which I can't remember now.
I feel like
Pinot Gris or something. Yeah.
Leave the wine for Jeff. That's great. Okay, question 2. Where would be most suited to reading your novel? Deep in an old dusty library, on a beach chair in a tropical paradise, or hunched over a takeaway flat white on a crowded city bus?
Ooh, I'm going to say all of those things. Possibly, I don't know, yeah. I mean, I would say tropical location, definitely. I'm hoping it is page-turning enough that in any one of those locations, it will get you. So I'm going to say all of them.
This next question is so ridiculous, I'm afraid to ask it. Does your novel have a spirit animal?
Oh, Jesus. A spirit animal. Oh God, I don't know. What does that mean? I don't know. What do you mean spirit animal? Oh, chicken. There's chickens in the book, so I'll go with chicken.
Oh yeah, there's chicken.
Yes.
There's also chicken poop in one scene of the book as well.
Yes, so let's go with chicken because the only animal that's actually in the book. So let's go with chicken.
Okay, last question. What is the ideal date for your novel? A spiritual hike in the mountains, a wild night out on the town, or a home-cooked meal and a cheesy movie?
Oh, definitely a home-cooked meal and a cheesy movie. Yes, that is me to a T, far out. If there's any excuse to stay at home, I will take it. I am the opposite of nightlife. So, yes, so since I've written Kate like that, I would say, yeah, and she's in very much at a moment in time that she wouldn't be able to go out. So, yes, cheesy movie and, yeah, take away.
Dinuka McKenzie, thank you very much for playing.
Oh, thank you so much, Ben. That was so much fun. Thank you very much.
The Torrent is published by HarperCollins, and you can get a copy of it from booktopia.com.au right now.
Continuing our Date with a Debut series, now over to Ben's interview with Maryrose Cuskelly.
Hi, I'm Ben Hunter, Booktopia's Fiction Category Manager. Joining me today from Melbourne over Zoom is Maryrose Cuskelly. She is a writer of both fiction and non-fiction. Her 2018 book, Wedderburn, A True Tale of Blood and Dust, was longlisted for 2 David Awards, and her debut novel has just been published. It's a stunning work of rural noir. It's called The Cane. Maryrose Cuskelly, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
My pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me.
So for weeks now, I haven't been able to sit through a cup of tea without someone from the book world popping up and asking me, have you read The Cane yet? Have you read The Cane yet? Have you read The Cane yet? And I've finally sat through it and read it properly this weekend. When I got a copy weeks ago, I just read the first page, right? And in that first page, we meet a character, Barbara McClymont, and she has gone to the local shop in this town and bought all the Bic lighters and all the matches, and she stands out the front of the shop, striking every match and flicking it away in a sort of brilliant, almost tableau of grief and horror. It's a stunning way to begin a book. Why don't you paint the picture for the reader, or the listener, I should say, the potential reader? How does Barbara McClymont come to that, to be in that position?
Barbara's daughter, Janet, has disappeared, and she disappeared while she was walking through the cane fields. And Barbara and her family, they live in a sugarcane growing district, obviously, and the harvest is about to start. And back in the 70s, everyone generally in Australia would burn the cane before they harvested. Nowadays, there's only really one place in Australia, which is around the Burdekin region in Queensland, around Ayr, that burn the cane. But back then, everyone would burn the cane to get rid of all the excess, so they call it trash, like all the excess leaves and that sort of thing, and kind of to drive out all the rats and things like that. And Barbara believes her daughter is dead, but she is desperate to find her daughter's body, and she's afraid that if the farmers nearby burn the cane, then she will never get to, I guess, hold her daughter again, even her dead daughter. And Barbara and her family are kind of like, they're blow-ins. They've only been living in the area about 6 months or so. And so I guess Barbara has this kind of wild, completely unrealistic hope that she can stop the sugar crush, which is what happens after the harvest. She can stop the crush happening by, just getting rid of all the
burning through the matches. It's a desperate attempt, isn't it? It's wonderful that we join a search or a thriller where the person has already been missing for weeks and days, and it's like the dread has already set in. So the original kind of drama of the search and the disappearance has already been lived in the town.
Yeah.
And now, the journalists are kind of rusted on. The cops are out of ideas. They've got no leads. They've turned up nobody. And it's stinking hot in northern Queensland. People are angry. And it's just this horrible mood of depression and angst. And that just grabs the reader from the first page, and you're hooked from there. So from what I understand, that you've taken an interest in that region, and particularly in the 1970s, there were disappearances and there are true events that kind of inspired you to write this. So could you tell me what's behind the inspiration?
Yeah, so I grew up in Queensland, and I mean, I grew up in the southeast corner, which is quite a long way from where the cane is set, and also where there were several disappearances of young children and young women in that 70s time. And over the years, they had kind of blended, and they kind of just blended into one. I wasn't quite sure. I was kind of get the disappearances and the events mixed up. And then so when I started thinking about writing something about it, initially I was thinking something non-fiction, and I began to trawl through the newspapers from that time. And the one disappearance that really had stuck with me was a young girl called Marilyn Wallman, who disappeared in the 70s and through in the cane fields. And because I guess I was a country kid walking to school, and I just remember, and because Marilyn was on her way to school when she went missing, that it just kind of seeped in. And I think I remember it was probably my mother's anxiety and that sort of thing around us walking to school. So it had just stayed with me for a long time. And periodically things would come up in the news about Marilyn Wallman, because it was a very, it was a major event around Mackay. And because it was never solved, like who actually took Marilyn, and in fact it was only in 2015 that they were able to finally determine that a piece of bone that had been found some years after she went missing had belonged to her. So her family didn't have a funeral for her until 2015. And so I was thinking about writing it as nonfiction, and then I kind of realised that a lot of the things I was interested in I could explore better in fiction, and some of those just related to my own memories and about being a child and growing up in a rural community. And also I just wanted to have a bit of fun, well, not fun exactly, but just to explore that time of the 70s, because it was such a time of social and cultural change, politically and all that sort of stuff as well. So I wanted, and also I was interested in this idea, this kind of Gothic idea of menace in the landscape as well. And so fiction just presented itself as a better way to explore some of those things.
Yeah, that oppressive heat and those burning cane fields at night really do tick the box for really evocative fiction. Why don't you take me through the characters that are at the heart of this story? It's really impressive as a work of fiction, because it's a debut novel for you, but it's fully fledged in terms of multiple perspectives and different aspects of this town and the people that are surrounding this disappearance. I love Essie. I love Fanta Pants, as I like to call him. He does not like to be called. And I love Carmel.
To be fair.
I can't imagine a more difficult gig than being a female police officer in the 1970s in rural northern Queensland. With a failed, what they would call it a manhunt, even though it's a girl that's gone missing. Take me through these characters. They're all brilliant.
Oh, thank you. Look, that was kind of one of the I suppose, I don't know, I just kind of naturally wanted to write it from different perspectives. So, and I did have to kind of wrangle those voices a bit, particularly as we were revising the novel with the editor. But so there's a first person voice, which is Arthur, who is kind of a, he's a older man, and he's kind of, he has a more broader view of the whole community and the history of the place and what's gone before. And so through Arthur, I guess, we get that more expansive view. Then we have Essie, who I love Essie too. Essie's 11. She knew Janet, who has gone missing. Janet used to babysit her and her sister. And Essie's just in that kind of delicate age where she's still a kid, but, adulthood and adolescence is approaching, and she kind of desperately wants to make that leap. But she's got a very protective mother, who has become more protective, obviously, in the wake of Janet's disappearance. And then Essie befriends this girl, Raylene. So she comes to town after Janet's gone missing, and Raylene's a little bit older, but because of just how she's grown up, she's still at primary school. But she and Essie kind of sets her cap in a way at Raylene, like she wants Raylene to be her friend, and she suspects Raylene knows a lot of stuff about all sorts of things, and Essie wants to know it too. And Raylene she's privy to a lot of information because her dad has bought the pub. So Raylene, picks up a lot from the pub. Eamon, or Fanta Pants, what his school students call him, he's come up from Brisbane to teach. He's a newly qualified teacher. Eamon's got, he's politically awakened. He's on board for women's liberation. He's been protesting against the South African rugby team's tour. He's a bit resentful of where he's found himself, and he's got hopes of going to London. But he would also like to, make his mark a bit at the school that he's in. So he gets hold of some copies of the Little Red School Book, which was this it was not much more than a pamphlet, but it was written by these Danish school teachers in the late 60s, and it was translated into, hundreds of different languages, I think. And it was about giving young people not just information about sex and drugs, but that was kind of what people who were alarmed by it focused on, but also just about questioning authority and taking control of their own lives and, standing up to the man a bit. And so Eamon gets some of these copies and he's going to give them to his students, but that all goes a little bit wrong. There's also Joe, who was Janet's boyfriend, and Joe's mother, she's a descendant of the South Sea Islanders who were brought to work in the cane fields, and his father is a cane farmer. And so but then there's also, I could go on. There is quite a few characters.
Yeah, it's a huge cast of characters for this little town, and it's impressive that you can achieve balance and that you can follow the different voices. I can only imagine there would have been a lot of revision, a lot of drafting, where you've kind of had to go back and go, okay, I need more of Eamon here, and I need less of Essie in there.
Yeah, well, certainly I needed more of Carmel, who's the policewoman, and I also needed a bit more of Barbara, who is Janet's mother. Yeah. So there were
Barbara remains an enigma to me, like right through that book. From that first page when you hear about her striking the matches, when you get these kind of visions of her at home on the balcony when Carmel goes to visit her and question her or inspect the daughter's room, Janet's room. She's just a ghost of a person almost, and her husband is convinced that his daughter's still alive and well somewhere. That's heartbreaking. Yeah. I found a lot of interest in all of these characters, and you also mentioned Joe and the kind of more expansive view he has. You actually take readers on a tour of the ecology and the geography of this landscape, and the history of like rural Queensland and cane farming in Queensland, and it's not all a pretty history, is it?
No, and that was, I suppose, one thing I was kind of interested in talking about in the book. It happens frequently when something terrible happens in a community, usually in a small community, and people will say, oh, well, I remember, like Tasmania's lost its innocence when there was a terrible massacre down at Port Arthur. And it's like, was Tasmania innocent before that event? Like, there's a lot of bad stuff has gone on in Tasmania, before that terrible massacre, what with, Aboriginal people being driven off and killed, convicts being brutalised. Like it wasn't that one massacre that cost Tasmania its innocence. And I guess, there are a few places in Australia, I think, that you could say are innocent in that way. And so I guess I did want to look at, those kind of what those accumulated desecrations or atrocities, do to a landscape, I suppose. So it's a little bit fanciful, I guess, and it's a bit, I suppose, when I talked about, it's kind of, there's something gothic in that notion, I suppose, but it was something I was just interested in slipping in there as part of the wider novel.
Yeah, and it also boils itself into the attitudes of the townsfolk. The hostility to women and non-whites in this community is really palpable, and those prejudices read really cleanly, and well, not cleanly, but they read believably for those characters, and that's I imagine that must be a hard thing to do for a novelist. There's got to be a challenge to write that in a way that is not ridiculous or just in a way that you can sort of step back from it and get what you need to get onto the page. How do you sit with trying to write that particular nasty dialogue and things?
Yeah. Well, actually, I was talking. I don't know. I forget who exactly about someone who had read the novel and was saying, was it really was there really that kind of level of sexism and racism in Queensland in the 1970s? I was like, oh yeah. I don't think I've over egged anything. And a lot of it, a lot of those kind of, casual remarks and casual misogyny or casual racism, it's kind of quite, I feel it, it's quite, I feel like it's quite familiar. I feel like it's quite, like I didn't have to kind of drag it out or kind of, what would some of those remarks, I've heard those remarks. I was told those remarks. I was, I remember being in an economics class in year 12 at my high school, and our economics teacher, who was a Catholic priest, but anyway, talking about how women were less productive workers because once a month, they sometimes had to take time off work. And I was kind of like, and this was just, so it was, I took it in as a young person, and I went to a boarding school, and there were lots of country kids, and as well as kids from PNG. It wasn't like kind of a posh boarding school. It was, so lots of kids from Western Queensland, Indigenous kids, like I said, kids from PNG, and we were just kind of clueless and ignorant, all us, I don't know, white, kids like me, white kids. So
you'd hear it all.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess, I just feel, I don't think it was exaggerated what I've written, and I certainly feel like it's kind of, I feel like it's authentic to my experience when I was a young person growing up in Queensland.
Yeah. For research, did you make it up to those kind of cane communities in the north? And if so, how have they changed today?
Yeah, I went up. I actually had, when I had first started thinking about writing something, I had gone up to Mackay, and then I was going to go up again when I had finally committed to write. It's going to be a novel, but then of course COVID happened, so I just had to do a bit of YouTubing and remember things. Look, it's much Mackay. Well, so around that area, it's quite there's still cane fields everywhere, but there's a bit more urban sprawl. And I mean, like anywhere, I guess, places is a bit more, it's not as kind of, it doesn't have that feel of the Badlands. when years ago, there's a stretch of road between Rockhampton and Serena, and it was called the Horror Stretch partly because wow. the road, it was such a terrible, it was a part of the Princess Highway, and it was just it was a terribly maintained road. It was quite there weren't many houses or townships or anything either side of it, and there was just there were kind of, if you were driving up there, people would say, don't stop on the Horror Stretch, or, don't stop on the Serena Stretch. And you'd kind of, there was this, and it had a reputation for, one vehicle car accidents, and there had been kind of murders and bodies found. I thought all that kind of thing, or lights in the distance. So there was this kind of, North Queensland did have a bit of a Badlands reputation, and also just that time Joe Bjelke Peterson was he kind of encouraged that idea of that Queenslanders were a race apart, and he was always threatening to succeed for Queensland to secede from the Commonwealth and stuff like that. And so there was this a bit of an idea of Queenslanders were different, and that was just more exaggerated the further north you went. And I think that's changed a bit.
Right.
I'm sure there are still pockets of it, but yeah, I think it's there are nice bars and restaurants and all the rest of it, and but I think there is still probably a little bit of that. But people were very nice to me.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, but
So now that you've got non-fiction and fiction under the belt, what have been the surprises for writing a novel for the first time? How is it different, and will you do it again?
Look, it was different. Like, I think writing fiction's actually much more difficult. Non-fiction, you just kind of have to follow the story, or, I mean, of course you have to shape it, and, in the end, you choose what you write and what things that you, where you place things and things like that. But I did find fiction more of a challenge. And in fact, the manuscript that I first delivered to the publisher, and because I wasn't thinking of it as crime fiction. I kind of had this idea that it was more, it was more in that tradition within Australia of the lost child, that kind of, going back to, Frederick McCubbin's painting called Lost, and there's this young girl, standing in a eucalypt forest all by herself, or even things like, Picnic at Hanging Rock, or, Dot and the Kangaroo. So I didn't really, and I was kind of trying to avoid calling it crime fiction, because because it was my first novel. It's like, I don't know if I've got the writing chops to write a crime novel that's got, all those elements that people expect.
Yeah.
But the publisher and then the editor both said to me, it's crime, and you just have to accept that it's crime, and write it like crime. So I had a really good editor who was able to kind of just point out some things to me that in kind of retrospect were kind of like obvious, like just in terms of the plot and just bringing the characters closer to the reader and things like that. So that was really useful. So the novel is quite, I mean, the bones were there in the original manuscript, but I did do quite a lot of revision with it. And I did love it doing it. And I have started working on another novel, but it's urban. It's set in an urban, and it's more contemporary. I don't think it's a crime novel, but but maybe it is. I don't know. But I would like to get back to nonfiction as well. I do love nonfiction.
I think people will read you whatever you do next.
Oh, thank you.
Maryrose Cuskelly, thank you for your time today, for being on the podcast. We now have our ridiculous questions, if you're ready for them.
Yeah.
So we're doing a perfect match thing. It's a bit of a blind date with a debut, if you will.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask some dating style questions.
All right.
So if you had to pair your novel, The Cane, sommelier style, with a beverage, had to be served with a beverage, any kind of posh wine or a cocktail or just something from the fridge at home, what would be your pairing?
Look, I kind of want to say rum and Coke.
Yep.
I think rum and Coke. I am going to say rum and Coke.
Yeah, that makes good sense to me. What would be the location most suited to reading your novel? In an armchair in the back of a dusty old library, in a tropical beach paradise, slung in a hammock, or hunched over a takeaway flat white on a crowded inner city bus?
Look, if you wanted to go for the whole, experience, it's probably, it's North Queensland, obviously. Maybe it's just under a tree somewhere, but, beside a cane field.
Beside a cane field.
Yeah.
Very specific. It's good. This is the more ridiculous question of them all. Does your novel have a spirit animal?
Oh. Look, again, I feel like I would need... I don't know how I'm going to do myself or the novel any favour by saying a cane toad. But...
A cane toad, yeah. Or something like a taipan snake.
Actually, yeah, maybe a taipan. Maybe a taipan with a cane toad in its mouth.
With a cane toad. Okay, final ridiculous question. What is the ideal date for your novel? Is it a spiritual hike in the mountains, a wild night of dancing in the city, or a home-cooked meal and a cheesy movie at home on the couch?
Look, I think it's a country-style pub, but in the front bar. And
counter tea.
Yeah. I think that's what it is.
I love that. Maryrose Cuskelly, thank you for playing.
My absolute pleasure, Ben. Thank you.
The Cane is published by Allen and Unwin, and you can get a copy of it right now from booktopia.com.au.
Thanks to Dinuka McKenzie, and you can find links to all the books discussed today in our show notes, or head over to booktopia.com.au. Stay tuned on Friday for our next podcast, where we'll be discussing the books that we are reading at the moment, and join us next week for the second episode in this duology series, A Date with a Debut. As always, thanks for listening, and never stop reading.